This is TWiT.
This episode of Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. If you're ready for a new career in IT, then check out ACI Learning. They offer affordable certification-based training that will help you launch your new career in IT. Individuals use the code TWIT30 for 30% off a standard or premium individual IT Pro membership at go.acilearning.com/twit. So it all started with an August 9th article in the Hollywood Reporter. A Disney sale to Apple? Don't count it out this time. Now, Alex, Lindsay, you've been saying Apple should buy Disney forever and ever. Does Apple have enough cash to buy Disney? I mean, outright? I don't
know. They'd have to borrow it, but they could.
They could.
Yeah, they could do that, or they could do stock transfer. I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, I think that Pixar was bought by Disney with stock. Like, I don't think in some cash, but I think it was a split of those things. It wasn't. Because I think that's how Steve Jobs ended up with 7% of Disney.
Disney's market cap is $156 billion. So
Apple only has
50
billion in cash, but they could probably they're good for the
if they held their breath, if they held their dividend breath for 3 quarters, they'd have enough to buy Disney.
But I don't think anybody's proposing that they buy Disney outright, or even that Disney is for sale outright. It's just that Bob Iger might want to sell parts off that don't make sense.
Or potentially, depending on how Bob Iger sees the end game, he wants to sell parts off. The theory of the Hollywood Reporter article is Iger may want to sell some parts off into places that are like declining businesses, and that might be prepping it for sale to a partner like Apple for the what remains, and that would be his exit because he famously can't find a successor. So maybe his successor is handing the company to Apple and running away. But the THR story, I thought it was a really balanced story because it is. It says right in the headline, like, we've heard this before. Why is it different this time?
Right.
And there are a few reasons it's different this time, right? Disney is under stress. Their biggest cash machine for the last 15, 20 years, ESPN, is in decline because cable subscriptions are in decline. And they invested a huge amount of money in launching Disney Plus, which I would say was successful, but they have a bunch of pressure saying you got to show profit, you got to make more money on this, even though that was never the original goal. The goal was to stake out the territory and build a product that would be one of the last ones standing. But the big thesis in that THR story is the Hollywood insider who basically says, look, all these entertainment industry companies are now going to be streaming companies, and streaming is technology, and the tech industry has so much more money and power than the entertainment industry that in the end, the tech industry is going to eat the entertainment industry alive. Like, that's what's going to happen. And that they said something like, in the end, all you're going to get is Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and one other streamer will be the only ones to survive because Apple, Amazon, Google, these companies have so much more money and so much more market cap than the entertainment industry, which we think of as giants. Like, Disney looms large in our minds, but if you look at the balance sheet and you look at the stock price and you compare it to the tech giants like Apple, it's not even close. So I think that the most interesting part of the premise is, if it's inevitable because of the world we live in right now, that tech companies are going to kind of swallow the entertainment industry whole, there's not a better companion for Disney than Apple, because they are two of the most similar companies culturally in existence. And a lot of what Disney has is stuff that Apple kind of wants. But I think what I see in a lot of the criticism of this, when people are like, no, it's never going to happen. And I was one of those people 10 years ago who was like, this is not going to happen. But it's different now. And I think one of the reasons is Apple's a much larger company than they were 10 years ago. They're huge.
And also in relationship to Disney.
In relationship to Disney, and then in relationship to itself as well, right? And they still have enormous pressure by investors to show growth, and we can debate like whether that's healthy for companies to have endless growth pressure. I think it's not, but that's the way the world works, right? And so that's where we are. And one of the things that Apple has done is gone into completely new markets that would have seemed ridiculous even 10 years ago, like Apple TV Plus, and the fact that an Apple TV movie won an Oscar and they won the Emmy for Best Comedy with Ted Lasso. Like, Apple's playing in all sorts of games that they never did before, and they're a size unlike the company even 10 years ago. And when you start to think about that and think about avenues for growth, I don't think it's unreasonable to say Apple might want to buy a big chunk of Disney and use it to fuel future growth if they believe they can do it. I still don't think it's super likely unless there's a feeding frenzy, and Apple was like, well, nobody else is going to buy Disney. We're going to buy it. But like Andy mentioned theme parks earlier, and it's like, I don't know. I think theme parks kind of potentially fit. I don't think it would be an Apple theme park, right? It would be a Disney theme park, but Apple might own Disney at that point. Apple and Disney are both really good at focusing on the customer experience. The Imagineers are right at that same intersection of liberal arts and technology that Apple is. They're very good at focusing on the customer experience and also getting as much money out of the customer as possible in all of those situations, right? Like, I know it seems super bizarre, the idea that Apple as a corporation might end up owning Disneyland and Disney Cruise Lines and things that are like, how is that even possible? But what I would say is the Apple of today is not the Apple that lives in most of our minds. It's already changed so much. It's so huge. And the pressure on it to continue to grow is so great that they are opening up whole new areas. And I think 10 years ago, we would have said an Apple movie, what's that? And let alone that it won Best Picture. But that's where the world we live in today. So I think that it's plausible, but I personally think, I actually understand why Bob Iger might want to sell to Apple. I don't think I can see the case for Apple to spend $150 billion on some of the assets of Disney right now, unless it's a situation where everybody in tech is buying the entertainment industry out, at which point Disney and Apple are the best partners.
And I think some of the timing will depend on some of the strikes as well, because the movie industry, if the strikes continue that are happening in Hollywood right now until January or February, which some people think could happen, the movie industry will be in a free fall. Like it's like COVID level. Like, people are talking a lot about it right now. It's that, but Apple and Amazon and Netflix actually are in a better position, which they're the ones that are holding the strings to the strike. That's the real problem with the whole thing. And so they're in a really good position. So the timing is really depends, because Disney may be as valuable as it is ever going to be, like right now. So that's the, that's probably something that Iger may be looking down. The problem is that there's a lot of really valuable assets. And for Apple, across the entire ecosystem, Iron Man and Marvel and Pixar and Star Wars and all those things across the entire ecosystem with AR, VR, interfaces, games, educational materials, stickers, everything. Those are very valuable. They have probably run most of their value. Disney, by overusing them, has probably run most of their value out of that system. So the problem is that can Disney actually continue to do, make the kind of money it's been making in the past? And it's starting to falter, because where do you take Marvel now? Where do you take Star Wars now? Where do you take those things now? They're not clear that there's an end product there. That it's not that it won't be valuable. The question is, will it be as guaranteed as it was before? And that's becoming unclear. So I think that, everyone's starting to not quite hit on all cylinders. And so I think that if you're looking at that, you have to be kind of worried. Also, if you're doing location-based AR, you're doing all kinds of other stuff. There's no better place to do that than a Disneyland. So if you wanted to add value to something and have it be like, hey, if you're using an iPhone, all this other stuff is available at Disneyland. That is it's a great R&D space because of the way that Disneyland is built in Disney World. But Disneyland, the way it's built, you can see people using it all. You can, there's a lot of things about it because it's a known product and it's something that Apple could really take advantage of. So I think that in a lot of ways, Disney is more valuable to Apple than it is to Disney. And so because they can use it as a magnifier in a way that Disney can't do by itself.
Right. That's the argument for tech companies to buy these companies, is that the tech companies have an engine of money, and for the Apple, it's the iPhone, that the standalone entertainment companies just don't have, right? And so you look at what Disney can do, and they are now constrained by everybody saying, how are you going to make money? Instead of we're going to spend billions in order to establish Disney Plus, it's now how are you going to make money? How are you going to deal with linear TV like ESPN going down? And Apple is like, well, because we got all that money from the iPhone, don't ask us. And
we can sell you. Apple could just sell more iPhones and make it worth buying Disney. If all of those Disney products and everything else suddenly we're mostly just, you got all the special stuff on the Apple platform that were related to those things. It's worth it by itself. I think the biggest problem Apple would have is actually antitrust. it will cinch up so many things for Apple that it's because it's two different markets. I think that they might be able to do it, but they're under so much pressure right now. I think people could see an end run here of Apple really closing, especially that sub 18 that they're already at 87%. They could bump that a bit higher with all of those product lines. So that's the thing that I think Apple has. I think it's a very valuable purchase. I think it's probably 50-50, maybe 30-50 that they would actually do it. Apple's never done more than I think Beats. I think Beats is the biggest one they did with $3.5 billion. Yeah. It's a huge cultural. Disney, as Jason said, is probably the closest to Apple in culture in many, many, many ways. And so it'd probably be the easiest one. You have a CEO that is ready to leave. So it's not like he's going to be trying to figure out how he remains in play.
He's already left once, yeah.
Right. So he's already left once. So you already have, so there's a bunch of things about it that make sense. Obviously, it's just everybody, I think just about every time someone's done this, it hasn't turned out well. So I think that's the biggest problem is that Apple would have to prove that they can do it better than everyone else, which they do often. but Apple has generally resisted large purchases because of the, trying to assimilate the culture has been, difficult.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Beats because that's one of my kind of stumbling blocks in all this. I think one of the reasons why the Beats acquisition worked and got Apple into streaming music services is that they didn't just buy a headphone manufacturer and like a fledgling startup music service. They also bought Dr. Dre and they bought Jimmy Iovine, who came in saying we have the knowledge of this industry. Yeah. that is we are major players. I should
point out, ran away as quickly as they could from the company. They took the cash. Yeah, but they had an office, but they didn't show up.
But they both contributed to the launch. They weren't. It's not as though they were around long enough to make sure that Apple knew how to run that business. One of my problems that I have imagining Apple's a wide acquisition of Disney is who at Disney can basically bring aboard, here is how things work at Disney. Here is why. No, you are not going to treat Disney cast members on the theme parks that way, like they're just college kids who come in and work for 3 weeks and you can fire them at will. These are people that are there because they love Disney, and we both benefit from that, and we also know how to exploit that correctly. So you're not going to basically say that just because your ability to shut down certain workers in your Apple stores worked there, that's how you're going to that's how you're going to keep control of the people that are the last interface between a 5-year-old child and their parents having a great time at our theme parks.
I would think that if Apple would make a purchase like this, they would know that one of the things they were doing is entering areas they don't know about and lean on the executives who run those parts of Disney to be the experts and join whatever the team is to do that. And my example would be, everybody likes to talk about the early days of Apple TV, and they say, oh, you mean Carpool Karaoke and Planet of the Apps. And it's like, well, no, I don't mean that, because that was the objective lesson of them as people who don't know anything about TV or the entertainment industry throwing something against the wall. What they did do, that was the smart thing after those two shows were in process, was hire the two guys from Sony who run Apple TV to this day. And those guys are entertainment industry experts. They're the subject matter experts. They work for Eddie Q, but it's very clear that Eddie Q, although he's thinking about strategy and who knows, maybe thinking about buying Disney right now, he lets those guys run that division, and they're the experts. And so they have listened to the subject matter experts. And it's one of those examples where, although there are all those stories about, oh, Tim Cook doesn't want you to swear on TV or whatever, like the truth is that Zach and Jamie, the guys who run Apple TV, the Sony executives formerly, like they're doing their thing and they know how to do it and they've been successful with it. So I think that could potentially be the model. The other thing I would throw out there is, I think it's an interesting thought exercise, and I don't know where I come down on this, but okay, $150 billion. Like if they said to Zach and Jamie, here's $100 billion, and in a year or two, we want Apple TV Plus to be Disney Plus. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it in 4 years. They couldn't do it in 8 years. That would be the reason you buy something, whether it's Disney or Paramount or something else, is you want to really grow your streaming service, and growing it with no catalog and no intellectual property, bit by bit, year by year, show by show, isn't growing it fast enough for your purposes, and that's why you would make a big sale. So that would be my argument. But I doubt they would make the mistake, given how they behave with TV Plus. If they did suddenly come in and say, we want to micromanage how the poorest paid people at the parks division are managed, that's going to be a disaster, right? But I'm not sure that would happen.
And even with Beats, and with other things that Apple's taken over in the past, it usually was a pretty light step at the beginning. It's like, we're going to figure this out for a little while, and then we're going to start doing stuff. And again, I think they probably leave. I think Apple's interest in Disneyland, for instance, is going to be more about how do we add AR and extra phone tools. They probably wouldn't touch how the Disneyland works, because Apple's pretty good at knowing that you don't always know exactly what makes something successful and not successful. So I think that they've been pretty good at that kind of thing, of not kind of messing with things unless they can figure it out. So I don't have any real concern that Apple would do anything odd with that. I think that it's mostly just, could they figure out how to assimilate the overall Disney culture into the Apple culture, and just all the people, and everything's just, just a lot with any of these. There's just a lot of politics and a lot of people who have, and who when you merge that, like, who gets to run this division versus that division, and is it an Apple person, is it a Disney person, that's just, it's two massive ships getting merged together. And so I think that it's just the overall culture, and I would say more executive culture than the edge, that they'd have to figure out, like, who goes where to make that happen. But I do think that, again, the advantage for Apple is, as Jason said, the advantage for Apple to fill up, you have an entirely full subscription service, that is got all the bits and pieces that it needs, and ESPN, and so I think that's so valuable to Apple. So I think it's, and I think that Apple and Amazon, they don't have to make money selling movies. Like, this is all like Glow, like someone was talking about Prime, like someone asked, when you're going to get rid of Prime. There was something that I saw, and someone asked me, I was like, never. I'm never going to get rid of Prime. It's like, do you see how many packages come into my house? Like, there's no way I'm going to get rid of Prime. And that's the point. Amazon is giving me video with my delivery. And Apple has got products, and this whole side angle of it makes it, that's why all these technology companies are going to do so well. And again, I do think a reckoning is coming, because even for me, I'm looking at how many times am I actually going to these subscription services. And the reality is, I'm not going to Disney very often. I'm not going to Max very often. I'm spending most of my time in Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and I'm not sure if it makes sense to keep all of these subscriptions.